Good evening, Berean. It's good to be with you again on this Lord's Day as we gather together to spend some time in His Word. We want to greet those of you who are with us online. It's good to have you here this evening as we turn to our Bible study. Before we open up the text, however, we're going to first review the morning's message and field any questions that you might have regarding the sermon this morning. So this morning we began one of the more well-known portions of Scripture, and that is the Paul's interaction in the city of Athens. And so when we last saw Paul, he was leaving by night away from Berea, and Timothy and Silas remained in Berea while he went to Athens. And so Paul, so in verse 16 of Acts 17, the scene opens up with Paul in the city of Athens, inundated by idols. And so this morning, I decided what I would do is I introduced you to the city of Athens first, its long history, what it was known for. Of course, Athens is a major tourist site for many people in the modern world. There are many historical structures and so on that attract tourists to the city. And so we spent some time this morning talking about the history of Athens, where it is, where it's geographically placed, and its long history. After that, I then went and began looking at verse 16, but I didn't jump right into verse 16. I first did a series of discussions with you on what it meant to be in the world, not of the world. And the reason I did that was because Paul here clearly argues against human ingenuity, human culture, human philosophy. That's a major issue here in his account in Athens. But I wanted to do a little bit about how believers face the situation of being a part of the world, being in culture, being around the philosophies of men. How do we respond? And my basic point was that I used three illustrations: the wheat and tares in Matthew 13, the immoral person in 1 Corinthians 5, and then discernment in 1 John 4. And my basic argument was we can't get out of the world. There's no way for us to leave the world, not until we die or Christ comes back. And so we have to live in the systems of the world. There's no way around that. And so that's why, again, the famous phrase of Jesus, in the world but not of the world. And so we recognize the fact that as Christians, we live amongst the unsaved. There's no way around that. There's no way to separate ourselves. We shouldn't try to move to the mountains, have a little Christian enclave there with no unsaved people around. Okay, that's not wise. It's not biblical. Jesus told his disciples that the wheat and the tares would grow intermingled with each other in the world, and trying to separate them would be dangerous. And so we live in the world, we evangelize the world, we're discerning about our involvement in the world, but we cannot escape the world. And so we spent some time talking about that. Then we jumped into verse 16, and our focus, there are three scenes in Paul's interaction in Athens, and we're going to spend a week on each of these scenes. The first scene is Christ against the philosophies of men. Christ against the philosophies of men. This is followed by Christ through the philosophies of men, and of course that's his famous sermon to Athens. And then we see Christ over the philosophies of men, as we see men come to submit their lives to Christ, even amongst the intelligentsia of Athens. And so our focus this morning was Christ against the philosophies of men. In verse 16, we looked at Paul's problem. He was moving around the city. He was provoked in his inner man about what he saw, the inundation of idols, and that caused him to respond. How did he respond? He responded by taking the gospel to the synagogues and to the streets. Luke says he went to the agora, the marketplace, and he shared the gospel. And while he was in the marketplace, some philosophers were debating with Paul. Epicureans, Stoic philosophers, and we looked at what those two philosophies of men were. And of course, those are one of the members talked to me this after service about how those philosophies are still in play today. I mean, the Epicureanism, the idea of hedonism, that you just go for your pleasure. That's what life's about. And Stoicism, that you shut down from everything in the world and you're stoic, you're unmoved by circumstances and situations. Those philosophies of men still exist today. And so Paul was debating both the Epicureanism and Stoicism began in Athens. Their founders began their philosophies there in Athens. So Paul, as I said this morning, went into the belly of the beast. He went into their backyard, and he presented the gospel, his response. And this led to some confusion. They were confused. They had no category for what Paul was saying. They called him a seed picker. He's a babbler. He's picking stuff from all over the place. He doesn't have, Christianity doesn't have any system. It's just a bunch of loose ends. They were saying they believe in a demigod. That's one of the word deity there that they use in verse 18. The word deities means demigod. We normally translate this word demon for in our New Testament theology, but the Greeks used it to describe demigods, part human, part divine. Of course, who's that? That's Jesus, right? And so they didn't have a category for Jesus, so they called him a demigod. He's partly God, partly man. And they said that Paul is talking to us about these strange demigods. And of course, that was Jesus he was talking about. And the reason they said that was because Paul said that Jesus was resurrected. All right, well, how in the world can you have a God die and be resurrected? He's got to be human. And so Paul was laying out to them the divine and human nature of Christ, and that he died and was resurrected, and they had no way to understand that. And so they had a request, verse 19. They wanted him to come up and talk to them about this. And they took him to the Areopagus. Some translations say Mars Hill. Mars and Ares, Ares for the Greeks and Mars for the Romans, was the god of war, And so Mars Hill, or the Areopagus, was the hill of Ares or the hill of Mars. And on that hill was the Council of Athens. And of course, the role of the Council of Athens was to evaluate education in Athens, traveling lecturers in Athens, and decide whether it was legal for them to continue to do what they were doing. And so we left off this morning with Christianity on trial. This is the first official trial that Christianity will go through. Does it pass muster for the scholars in Athens, or is Paul just a seed picker, an idle babbler? Is that all that he is? And so next time we're in Acts, we'll look at how Paul takes them to task. I mean, Paul doesn't back down here. He goes from what they know to be true to the gospel, and does it masterfully. And we'll see that next time. Any questions on the morning's message?
Are concerned with your side examples, your scriptures that you use to support what the sermon was. The first one was the wheat and tares.
Yeah.
It says, "Don't gather them up lest you uproot the wheat with them." Mm-hmm. What does that mean? What is he saying there? Don't disturb them lest you uproot the wheat with them.
What he's saying is that the wheat, Christians, their lives are intermingled with the tares. And if you uproot the tares, you're going to impact the wheat. Just imagine if a Christian lady is married to an unsaved person. She got saved and he didn't get saved. Well, if you rip up the tares, she's going to be in trouble in that culture. And so Christ said, leave the tears until the end times. And so basically what you have is that the world as we know it is going to be a mixture of saved and unsaved people. And it's going to be that way until Christ's kingdom comes. Any type of disturbance where you're trying to remove tears is going to impact the wheat. That's why, again, I argued, let's all get a Christian camp together, and we're all going to move to the mountains, and we're going to have no unsaved people around us. That's not God's will, and it's the idea is foreign out of the Bible. Although Christian groups throughout history have done that all the time. Mm-hmm. Almost every period of Christian history has people who feel that they needed to exit the world, and let's all get together in our Christian enclave and keep the world out.
Right. Second question is about the mustard seed. So I've heard a lot of people say that you just need a little faith. That's all you need. But Jesus made it several times. Seemed like he rebuked the disciples for having little faith. And the mustard seed, if I'm remembering correctly, that's a little seed, but it grows
Yes.
into a big tree. So
Yes.
is the real point there is that, yeah, you got the faith of a mustard seed, but that faith is expected to grow. Is that?
Well, it depends on the passage. And so Christ can use one illustration two different ways. And so that phrase, little faith, can be both positive and negative. Okay, it can be negative, like what we saw this morning in my meditation, where they weren't exercising that faith in order to trust the Lord and not be anxious. But it can also be used positively, like in Luke 17. They're complaining. Now, I will say this: Luke 17 is a little bit of a challenge. People have misinterpreted that text plenty of times. The name it, claim it people use it all the time as a means of getting what they want. But in that text, what's going on is the disciples are. I wrote an article on this. It's on the G3 G3 blog. But basically, what's going on here is the disciples hear Jesus say, "Forgive somebody 7 times in one day," and use immaturity as an excuse to not obey. So they say, "Increase our faith." So what they argue is, I want to do that, Jesus. I want to do what you said, but I can't do it because I'm in a state of not having enough faith to do that. So they were using a lack of faith as an excuse not to obey. Jesus retorts, just a little faith is necessary. Okay, so they were saying, I can't obey until I'm more mature. Christ is saying you can obey in the state that you're in presently, and that's why he argues for that. Faith can grow. We can mature in our faith, and our faith can grow and become more vigorous. Jesus is not saying that that's a bad thing. That's a good thing. We just can't use it as an excuse for not obeying him now. Which that's what the disciples are doing. I'd love to forgive my brother 7 times, but I'm not in a state where I can do that. And Christ is saying, yes, you are. Mm-hmm. Excellent questions. Any other questions on the morning's message?
You mentioned groups that have kind of split off and done their own thing over the years. Seems like the Christian nationalist thing is starting to gain some traction and it has some on several fronts. Are you familiar with that? And how would
Yeah,
you
yeah,
argue that biblically?
Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's several different flavors of it. I mean, there's the flavor that says we're gonna separate from everybody else and kind of do our own thing, and then there's the other flavor that says we want to take over the United States. Right. Okay. Well, both of those are wrong. Right. You know, those are wrong responses. They're unbiblical responses to. I mean, it's clear that the world is evil, and we have to be light in the world. Separating from the world, again, the wheat and the tares is a good example of that. The example of the other one that you bring up, the idea of taking over the world, you know, Jesus is very, very clear. Christ said to Pilate, if my kingdom was of this world, what would my followers do? Take up swords? They wouldn't let you take me. There'd be a fight on here. If my kingdom was of this world, we would be fighting you right now. But Christ said it's not of this world. And so the whole idea that I am a Christian, I want to take up arms against my country is insane. All right, and so I believe that the New Testament forbids both of those type of responses. Now, am I saying that, for example, a Christian shouldn't vote? Well, sure, he should vote. Should you vote your Christian ethics? Well, yeah, you should vote your Christian ethics. But what happens if you don't win the election? You keep on rolling. All right. So we're to influence the world. We're to be influential. We're supposed to be engaged. We're supposed to be doing things. But taking up arms or separating from the world is not Christian responses. Oftentimes, that's an excellent question, though, Luke. But oftentimes, I ask people who argue this type of thing, what did the apostles do? What was their response? Are you going to say that Rome was better than the U.S.? Rome was worse than we are, more immoral than we were. Now, it's hard to believe that, of course, because as immoral as we are. But Rome was worse than we were. Well, Paul didn't spend one iota of time even thinking about should I overthrow Rome. He could care less about Rome. His job was what? Spread the gospel. Spread the gospel. That was his job. And so we have to be careful. You know, you are right. It's gaining steam, and we have to be careful as Christians and not to get caught up with it. Yeah, excellent. Yes, go ahead, sister.
At the end of your sermon, you spoke a little bit about how Christians should treat people that are in the world.
Yes.
How should a Christian treat people who have gone against his design for marriage, and just suppose that it's somebody in your family?
So let's say somebody in your family is in a same-sex marriage. What should the believer do? It's kind of funny. A few weeks ago, a well-known Christian speaker, pastor, if I said his name, you would all know him immediately, got on his podcast and said that an older lady had asked him, in the church had asked him whether she should go to her granddaughters or grandsons, one of the others, same-sex marriage. Well, they were marrying a transgender person. It's basically they were marrying a same-sex person. I mean, transgender, what is that? It's foolishness. And so they were entering into a gay marriage, and so this grandmother asked the pastor, should she go? And his advice was, okay, so he said, okay, so have you let your view be known? Do they know that you're a Christian? Yes, they know I'm a Christian. Have you told them what the gospel is? Yes, told them the gospel. Well, then if they know, then just go ahead and take a present with you. I said, that's not the right response.
Right.
You know, because as a Christian, I can't validate or support these type of perversions of what God has intended. And I wouldn't go to they were having a KKK wedding. I wouldn't go to that. How am I going to go to that? Am I going to support what's going on? Well, no. And so you have to be careful. It doesn't mean that you need to be rude to people. That's what I said. I said this morning. I didn't want to use. I kept wanting to use the phrase, but I avoided it because it's so misunderstood. I wanted to say you can disagree and not be disagreeable, but sometimes people use that. Well, you're just spineless. Well, no. What I'm saying is I don't have to call people names, and I don't have to put people down, and to tell them that what they're doing is sinful, and I can't be a part of it. And so, if you have a relative in a same-sex marriage, I think as a Christian you're obligated not to support that. If you know, I would have some struggle, to be honest, with them coming to events at your house. If you were to have them come, I would advise, of course, that they couldn't stay with each other. That would not in your place, you know. And so I think that there are some limits you'd have to put on it. But as far as supporting what they're doing, I would have a major problem with that. You know. And God, it's not just me. I mean, I'm acting like I'm an authority here. That as a Christian, again, in the world but not of the world, and the idea of supporting sinful violations of God's word and lending my support to that is inappropriate. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I feel like if you were standing on scripture full time, they're already going to know your point of view. I mean, I wish one of my kids would try something like that. I say that sarcastically. I mean, I think they know that's not happening. I think we have to just make sure while we're standing for Christ that we are openly expressive about that so that our views are known before it even gets to a point where somebody would even consider presenting something like that to us.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think in this grandmother's case, she had been very clear with her grandchild. At least that's what she said. I don't know for sure, but they still asked her if she would come. And so, yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, you have to take a stand on these issues. It should be clear to those around you what your Christian perspective on life is. Absolutely, it should be clear. Yeah, definitely. Any other questions on the morning's message? All right, let's transition.